Hello everyone, my name is Elias. On this video, we'll be discussing the myFlaskApp.py file. In particular, we'll be going through this executable line by line as I find that the exercise provides students some insight as to how Flask and Jinja 2 interact with each other. Starting from the top line, we have from Flask, import Flask. This is just an instance of the class Flask. Then we have render underscore template. This is a Jinja 2 package that renders templates into HTML. Next, we have URL underscore for. This is a way to generate a URL to a given endpoint with a method provided. We'll talk more about that here in a second. In the next line, we have from Flask underscore SQL Alchemy, import SQL Alchemy. SQL Alchemy is a Python SQL toolkit that allows for object relational mapping. That is, it allows for the management of databases using high-level entities such as classes and objects. On the next line, we have from datetime, import datetime. This is just a way for us to associate timestamps with our user entries. In the following line, we have app equals Flask, and then we're passing the parameter name with underscores on both sides. This is the application object as an instance of a class Flask module, not to be confused with a Flask package. For those of you that want to learn what the difference is, make sure you do homeworks 1 and 2 where we cover this topic. The next line of interest, we have app.config. We pass an argument, and then we're doing an assignment. So let's take a look at what's happening here by first evaluating the left-hand side. So we're taking the configuration method, and we're acting on the app object that we created previously, and we're passing a parameter called SQL Alchemy underscore database underscore URI. So what this is particularly doing, it's taking the location of the applications database from the SQL Alchemy underscore database underscore URI configuration variable. And if none is present, then looking at the right-hand side, we create a database named myFlaskDB.db, and we store it in the relative path that is the current working directory as specified by the 3 forward slashes. If we wanted to specify a direct path, we would need to use 4 forward slashes. And then finally, we have db equals SQL Alchemy, and we're passing app as the parameter. All we're doing here is we're just creating a database object, and we're naming it db. Before we continue, let's take a look at this again. So we're creating a SQLite database, and some of you may be asking, why not a MySQL database or a PostgreSQL database, which are more popular? Well, the reason why we're creating a SQLite database is that they are an extremely convenient way of developing small applications. The reason for this is that each database is stored in a single file on disk, which means that there is no need to run a database server. This makes SQLite an extremely convenient way of quickly spinning up applications without having to worry about servers. Okay, next let's act on our DB object that we just created, and let's modify our database. So let's take a look at this line first. So here we have ID equals db.column, and then we're passing some parameters, db.integer, and primary key equals true. So we're acting on the SQL Alchemy object that we created, which is a SQLite database, and we're adding a column, and we're naming the column ID. We want this column to be of type integer, and we want it to be the primary key, that is the unique identifying number. Let's take a look at this one for another example. Here we have email equals db.column. We're passing db.string and then 200 inside of that. Nullable equals false and unique equals true. Again, breaking this down, we have on our DB database object, we want to create a column, name it email. We want it to be of type string of no more than 200 characters. We want to require that something be entered, and we don't want any duplicates. I guess it's another example. Let's look at this last line. What we're doing is we're creating a column named date submitted, where we're recording timestamp, and this is the way that we want the timestamp to be denoted. Okay, let's look at this function here. So the repr function tells Python how to print objects in this class. This is particularly helpful when debugging, and let's look at why that's the case. So analyzing the return statement, we have string formatting in place, which allows us to replace the missing value, that is the curly braces, with the email string, and then return everything as a string. So when you're creating the database, this function can come in handy for debugging. Think of it similar to the print statement in Python. Next line of interest would be at app.route / being passed as a parameter. And here what we are doing is we're using decorators to register functions as callbacks for particular events. In this case, the app.route decorator creates an association between a URL, which is passed as an argument, and the function it invokes. We'll talk more about that here in just a second. In the bigger picture, though, what this means is that when a web browser requests a URL passed using decorators, Flask is going to invoke the associated function and pass, then return the value of it back to the browser as a response. In the particularities of this file, though, we're not naming the decorator itself, and there's only one function, mainly home. So this decorator is associated with this by default because there's only one of each. And the home function, it's rendering a template named home.html. So in this particular case, what's happening is home.html is being acted upon by the render_template. Render_template takes all the variable spaces and replaces them with actual values, then renders everything and returns it as a HTML. Quick note about render_template. You can use the templates folder as the default location for all your Jinja templating files, and that's what we did in this case. Alternatively, should you want to name this folder anything else, you will have to specify the direct path to it when you pass the arguments into it, just as a heads up. And then finally, we have this small if statement down here. This is used mainly for debugging, but I would encourage you to use it with caution and don't rely on it too much, as it is not as reliable as I wish it were. When debugging, this comes in handy. And then if you want to be a little bit more advanced, you can use try and escapes so that you can break down your code while you're writing it from the start. And that sums up this walkthrough. I encourage you to come back to this walkthrough a couple of times as you're going through the homework, as the assignments will require you to understand exactly what's happening at a lower level before you can add more components to it, which is what the homework assignments are about. And that's it. Thank you so much.